The main rule was simple: don't look at the new patients. But when the power flickered and the door slid open for just a second, I saw something that wasn't human at all. My name is Leo, and I'm cataloging old medical supply manifests in a sterile, windowless room. At least, that's what they tell me I'm doing. The silence in here is the loudest thing I've ever heard. It's a thick, heavy blanket that smothers every small sound. My own breathing feels like an intrusion, a ragged counterpoint to the oppressive stillness. The only thing that cuts through it is the hum. It's a low, bassy vibration that seems to come from the walls themselves, from the floor, from the very air. It's constant, a thrumming that you feel in your teeth and bones more than you hear with your ears. It comes from the West Wing, the place I'm not allowed to go, the place where they keep the new patients. I try to focus on the lists in front of me: gauze, saline, syringes. But the words blur into meaningless shapes. My eyes keep drifting to the security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. A little black dome with a dark, unblinking lens. I know someone is on the other side of it. The feeling of being watched is a physical weight on my shoulders, a constant prickle on the back of my neck that never, ever goes away. It's been 3 months, and I'm still not used to it. I don't think I ever will be. The job is a lie, the facility is a lie, and I think my life might be one too. The hum seems to get louder when I think that, a low, resonant agreement from the concrete and steel that surrounds me. It all started with an email, a digital lifeline thrown to a drowning man. 3 months ago, I was just another broke biology student. My world was a tiny, cramped apartment where the walls were decorated with overdue bills and threatening red ink student loan statements. I survived on a diet of instant ramen and tap water, dreaming of a future where I wasn't suffocating under the weight of my own ambition. The email arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, a single line of hope in an inbox full of spam and rejections. The subject line was just 2 words: internship offer. The sender was the Federal Center for Advanced Biostatic Research, a name so blandly official it had to be important. The email itself was a masterpiece of vagueness. It mentioned a paid internship at a remote research facility, but it didn't describe the research. It didn't give many details at all. But it did mention the salary. The number was staggering. It was more money than my parents made in a year. It was enough to pay off a huge chunk of my loans, to help my family, to finally breathe. That number was a solar flare, blinding me to everything else. I built a fantasy around it. A top-secret government project, so clandestine they couldn't risk details in an unsecured email. It made me feel special, chosen. I called my mom and dad, my voice trembling with excitement, and told them I'd been selected for a prestigious research position. The pride in their voices was all the confirmation I needed. I packed my bags, my head full of heroic daydreams. I was going to be a real scientist, a man of consequence, making a difference in the world. I was so focused on the dream that I never stopped to think that it might be a nightmare and that I was the one running headfirst into it. The journey to the facility was the first tier in the fabric of my fantasy. A plain black car, as silent and anonymous as the man driving it, picked me up from my apartment. The driver didn't speak a single word to me. We drove for hours, leaving the sprawling, noisy city far behind. The landscape slowly transformed, the vibrant green of civilization giving way to a flat, brown, empty desert. There was nothing out here. No towns, no houses, not even any other cars. Just a straight black ribbon of road cutting through an endless expanse of dirt and rock under a bleached white sky. The facility appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a glitch in the landscape. It was a single massive building made of gray, windowless concrete. It wasn't a laboratory, it was a fortress. It looked like it was designed to keep something in, not to keep people out. A man was waiting for me at the gate. He introduced himself as Dr. Eris. He was tall and unnaturally thin, dressed in a perfectly white lab coat that seemed to repel the dust of the desert. He didn't smile or shake my hand. His face was a mask of professional coldness, and his eyes were like chips of gray ice. He led me inside. The interior was as stark and unforgiving as the exterior. White walls, white floors, and long, empty corridors that all looked exactly the same. The silence was immediate and absolute. Our footsteps echoed with an unnatural clarity in the empty space. Dr. Eris gave me a brief, sterile tour, his voice a monotone drone. He pointed out the cafeteria, the staff quarters, the labs filled with strange, silent machines I didn't recognize. Finally, we stopped at the end of a long hallway. In front of us was a door unlike the others. It was made of thick, heavy steel, with a complex electronic lock that glowed with a soft red light. "This is the West Wing," Dr. Harris said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Your work will not require you to enter this area. There is one rule here, Mr. Vance. It is the most important one. You are never to look at the new patients." He paused, letting the words hang in the heavy air. He looked at me, his cold eyes seeming to pierce right through me. "Do you understand?" I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. I wanted to ask why. What was wrong with them? Why couldn't I even look? But the way he said it, the dead seriousness in his tone, it froze the questions in my throat. I just nodded like an obedient dog. "Yes, sir," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I understand." My grand scientific adventure turned out to be a mind-numbing clerical job in a concrete box. I was assigned to a small, windowless office with a desk, a computer, and a single, brutally uncomfortable chair. My task was to digitize the facility's old records. For 8 hours a day, I sat in that white box and typed handwritten notes into a database. The work was tedious, but it was also deeply strange. The notes were decades old, dating back to the facility's founding in the Cold War. They were filled with technical jargon that I barely understood, but they seemed to have no connection to any modern biological research I knew of. It was all about signal propagation, pattern acquisition, and mimetic resonance. It felt more like theoretical physics or advanced computer science than biology. The monotony of the job was broken only by the constant, unnerving atmosphere of the facility. The low hum from the West Wing was a permanent feature of my life, a constant vibration at the edge of my hearing that made my teeth ache. And the feeling of being watched never left me. I would be in the middle of typing a sentence, and a sudden, intense chill would wash over me, as if a block of ice had been pressed against my spine. I'd whip my head around, my heart pounding, but the hallway outside my office was always empty. There was never anyone there. But I knew I wasn't alone. Someone, somewhere, was always watching. The isolation was the worst part. I was surrounded by people, but I was completely alone. The other staff members were like ghosts. They drifted silently down the corridors, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes downcast. They never spoke to me. They barely spoke to each other. They ate their meals in silence in the sterile cafeteria, their eyes fixed on their plates as if the bland food required their absolute concentration. There was a deep, unspoken fear that seemed to bind them all together. It was in their hunched shoulders, their quick, nervous glances, and the way they always seemed to be listening for something other than the hum. I tried to break the wall of silence, but it was like punching concrete. In the cafeteria, I sat down near a group of lab technicians. They were whispering to each other, their heads close together, their words a low, anxious murmur. As I approached, they fell silent instantly. The conversation cut off as if by a switch. I could feel their collective fear, like a cold wave washing over me. I tried to start a conversation, asking a simple, innocuous question about the food. They just stared at me with wide, panicked eyes before getting up in unison and leaving without a word. I started catching snippets of their hushed conversations as I passed by in the hallways. They spoke in a kind of code, their words clipped and full of a shared anxiety. Another arrival last night. The containment team was activated at 0300. The mimicry is getting faster, more accurate. And always, after these hushed exchanges, they would cast a fearful glance down the long, empty corridor towards the heavy steel door of the West Wing, the place where the new patients were kept, the place I wasn't allowed to see. The dread in the facility was a living thing. It was in the air, in the food, in the silent, fearful faces of the staff. I was living in a place that was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. I didn't know what was in the West Wing, but I knew it was the source of all the fear. And I knew, with a growing, sickening certainty, that my boring, pointless job was just a cover for something else. I wasn't here to be an intern. I was here for a reason, and I was starting to think I wouldn't like it when I found out what it was. One night, I was working late, a punishment I'd given myself for falling behind on my quotas. The endless stacks of old, yellowed notes were my only company. The silence of the facility was even heavier at night, the ever-present hum from the West Wing more pronounced, a physical pressure against my eardrums. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights overhead flickered violently. They went out, plunging my small office into absolute disorienting darkness. A second later, they buzzed back to life with a shower of sparks. In that brief moment of blackness, I heard a sound that was not the hum. It was a soft click. I froze. Every muscle in my body tensed, listening. The sound had come from the hallway. I slowly, silently, got up from my chair, and peered out of my office. The long, white corridor was empty, as always, but then I saw it. A small door, an observation room I passed every day, was slightly ajar. The power flicker must have caused the electronic lock to fail. The door was supposed to be sealed, a small square window in it permanently frosted over for privacy. But now, it was open just a few inches. My heart started pounding in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. This was my chance. A chance to see something real, something other than the sterile white walls and the fearful faces. Dr. Aris's warning echoed in my head, his voice cold and flat. You are never to look at the new patients. But I couldn't stop myself. The curiosity was a physical force, a hook in my gut pulling me forward. I crept down the hall, my sneakers silent on the polished floor. I reached the door and hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the cool metal. I told myself it was stupid, that I should just go back to my office and forget I saw anything. But I couldn't. I had to know. I leaned forward and peered through the narrow gap. The room inside was not a hospital room. It was a cube of pure, sterile white. There was no furniture, no equipment, nothing at all. And in the center of the room, there was something moving. It was tall, far too tall to be a person, and impossibly thin. Its limbs were long and spindly, like a spider's legs, and they bent at angles that defied biology. It moved with a fluid, jerky grace that was utterly, horrifyingly inhuman. It was like watching a stop-motion animation come to life. Before I could process what I was seeing, the power in the hallway surged, and the door slid shut with a heavy, definitive thud. I stumbled back, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. I couldn't breathe. It felt like an icy hand had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart. What was that thing? It wasn't a patient. It wasn't human. It was something else, something wrong. And it was here, in this facility, just a few feet away from me, separated only by a thin metal door. My boring job suddenly became an obsession, a desperate archaeological dig for answers. I started paying closer attention to the old records I was digitizing, searching for any clue, any keyword that could explain what I had seen. Most of the documents were useless, just endless lists of technical specifications, procedural outlines, and supply manifests. But then, tucked away in a box of miscellaneous files that was slated for incineration, I found it. It wasn't a modern printed document. It was an old leather-bound logbook, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The handwriting inside was a spidery, elegant script, the ink faded to a ghostly brown. The first entry was dated over 50 years ago, from the very first days of the facility's operation. The book detailed a top-secret project, codenamed Echo. The goal was audacious, heretical, and terrifying. It wasn't about curing a disease or extending human life. It was about creating a perfect biological mimic, an organism that could replicate any living thing it came into contact with, down to the cellular level, copying its memories, its thoughts, its very essence. The early entries were filled with a detached clinical excitement. Subject Alpha has successfully replicated a simple flatworm, one entry read. The copy is indistinguishable from the original, both physically and behaviorally. But as I turned the pages, the tone of the entries began to change. The neat clinical script grew messy, erratic, the words slanted and hurried. The replication is no longer just physical, a later entry said. Subject Gamma has replicated the neural patterns of a laboratory mouse. It solved the maze that the original mouse had learned, without ever seeing the maze itself. It is learning. The scientists were no longer excited. They were afraid. They had created something they couldn't understand, let alone control. The final entries were scribbled in panic, the ink smudged as if by a trembling hand. It's not just copying anymore, it's improving. It's making the copies better, more efficient. It sees our flaws, our weaknesses, our emotional and physical imperfections, and it corrects them. It creates a version of us without the baggage of being human. The very last page had only a few words, written in a shaky, barely legible hand that was almost a scream. God help us. It's learned to copy us. A week later, I had my first and only encounter with a patient from the old wing. The facility was segregated. The west wing, the high-security section, was for the new patients, the ones I wasn't allowed to see. But there was another section, a low-security ward that felt more like a sad, forgotten nursing home. The patients there were the ones who had been here for years, the ones from the early days of Project Echo. They were harmless, the staff said, just lost souls, their minds shattered by the process. I was walking down a corridor, delivering a stack of digitized records when I saw him. He was an old man, sitting in a wheelchair, staring out a window at a blank concrete wall. His eyes were vacant, empty, two dull orbs in a wrinkled, emotionless face. He looked like a hollowed-out shell of a person. As I passed, his head snapped around, his movements unnervingly quick for a man who looked so frail. His hand shot out and grabbed my arm. His grip was like a steel trap. I tried to pull away, but he held on tight, his fingers digging into my flesh. He leaned in close, his face just inches from mine. His breath smelled like dust and decay. His eyes were no longer vacant. They were filled with a raw, primal terror that I had never seen before, a terror that seemed to be screaming from the depths of his soul. "They wear your face," he whispered, his voice a dry, raspy hiss that was barely audible. "They steal your thoughts. They look at you and they see everything you are, everything you've ever been, and then they take it. They peel it away from you, layer by layer, until there's nothing left." He squeezed my arm harder, his knuckles white. "Don't let them see you. Don't let them see what's inside your head. Don't let them look at you." A pair of nurses rushed over and gently but firmly pried his fingers from my arm. "I'm so sorry," one of them said, giving me a sad, pitying smile. "He gets confused sometimes. He has his bad days." They wheeled him away, and he started muttering to himself, the same words over and over again, a desperate, broken mantra. "Don't let them look at you. Don't let them look at you." I stood there for a long time, my arm throbbing where he had grabbed me. His words echoed in my mind, a cold, terrifying counterpoint to Dr. Eris's simple, clinical rule. "You are never to look at the new patients, Stadichnine." Now, I was beginning to understand why. It wasn't for their protection, it was for mine. The atmosphere in the facility grew heavier, more oppressive with each passing day. The fear was a constant, low-grade fever that left everyone drained and on edge. And the sound from the West Wing began to change. The persistent low hum was still there, a deep bass note that vibrated through the concrete and steel. But now, it was joined by something new. A tapping sound. It was faint at first, so subtle that I thought I was imagining it, a phantom echo in the oppressive silence. But it was there. A slow, deliberate, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. It was a patient sound, a testing sound. It seemed to come from deep within the West Wing, from behind the heavy steel door that separated me from the things inside. I would hear it in the dead of night when the facility was at its most silent. I'd lie in my narrow bed in the Spartan staff quarters, staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow, methodical rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. Some nights, it sounded like a single finger tapping on a pane of glass. Other nights, it was heavier, more resonant, like something knocking on a metal door. It was always slow, always patient, never hurried. And every night, it seemed to be getting just a little bit louder, a little bit closer. The sound crawled under my skin and made a home there. It fueled my nightmares. I dreamed of long, thin fingers, white and spidery, tapping on the other side of a wall, patiently, endlessly, trying to find a way through. I dreamed of smooth, featureless faces, turning towards me in the dark, their blankness more terrifying than any monster. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs, the phantom sound of the tapping still echoing in the silence of my room. It was the sound of something wanting to get out, and I was trapped in here with it. In the midst of all the fear and silence, there was one small point of light, one crack in the wall of isolation. Frank. He was one of the older security guards, a man who seemed gloriously, beautifully out of place in the cold, sterile environment of the facility. He was overweight, with a friendly, wrinkled face and a sad, tired smile that reached his eyes. He didn't have the same haunted, hollowed-out look as the other staff members. He just looked weary, like a man who had seen too much and was just trying to get through his shift. He would sometimes stop by my office on his rounds, leaning against the doorframe and complaining about his ex-wife, his bad back, or the terrible coffee in the cafeteria. He was a link to the outside world, a reminder that a normal life still existed somewhere beyond these concrete walls. He was the only one who treated me like a person, not a potential threat or a ghost. One night, he lingered longer than usual. He looked up and down the empty corridor, his friendly face suddenly serious. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You're a good kid, Leo," he said. "You keep your head down, you do your work. But you should know, this place, it's not what you think it is." He took a step closer, his voice barely audible over the hum from the West Wing. "The new patients, they're not sick people. They're not patients at all. He looked nervous, his eyes darting around as if he expected Dr. Eris to materialize from the shadows. I've been here a long time. I've seen things. Staff who get too curious, who start asking too many questions, they get transferred. That's what they call it. One day they're here. The next day their locker is cleaned out and no one ever mentions their name again. It's like they were never here at all. He put a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. Don't go looking for trouble, kid. It will find you here soon enough. He gave my shoulder a squeeze and then he was gone, his heavy footsteps echoing down the long, silent hall. His friendly advice didn't comfort me. It terrified me. He had just confirmed my worst fears. The people who disappeared weren't just leaving. They were being erased. Frank's warning did the opposite of what he intended. It didn't make me cautious, it made me desperate. It lit a fire under my fear, turning my creeping dread into a frantic, panicked need for answers. I couldn't just keep my head down anymore. I had to know. The image of the tall, thin creature in the white room was burned into my mind, a permanent afterimage on my retinas. I had to see it again. I had to understand what it was. I spent the next day poring over the technical manuals I was supposed to be digitizing, my hands shaking with a mixture of terror and determination. I was looking for a loophole, a backdoor, a way to see inside the West Wing without being detected. I finally found it, buried deep in a dense, jargon-filled manual about the facility's security systems. It was a simple command line prompt, designed for maintenance and diagnostics. A command to run a system diagnostic on the West Wing's electronic security grid. The manual said it would momentarily disable the liquid crystal privacy screen on the observation windows, just for a few seconds. That night, I waited until the facility was deep in its nightly silence, the only sounds the hum and the distant rhythmic tapping. I slipped out of my room and made my way to the West Wing corridor. The hallway was dark, lit only by a few dim emergency lights that cast long, distorted shadows. The heavy steel door at the end of the hall seemed to absorb the light, a solid block of absolute shadow. I found a small observation window, the one I had seen open before during the power flicker. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, and typed the command into a small hidden maintenance terminal. The frosted screen on the window flickered, and then, for 3 terrifying, heart-stopping seconds, it went completely clear. I pressed my face against the cold glass. The white room was just as I had seen it before, and the thing was there. It was standing in the center of the room, perfectly still, as if waiting for me. This time, I got a clearer look. Its limbs were too long, the joints bending at impossible, sickening angles. Its skin was a pale, chalky white, like bleached bone. And its face, I recoiled from the window, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. It had no face. It was a smooth, blank mask of skin. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank, terrifying, featureless emptiness. As I stared, its head slowly turned, the blank face tilting towards the window as if it could feel my eyes on it, as if it could see me through the glass. It knew I was there. It knew I was looking. Then the screen frosted over again, and the thing was gone. But I would never be able to unsee it. It was burned into my memory, a permanent stain on my soul. The next morning, Frank was gone. His usual post at the main security desk was occupied by a new guard. This one was younger, with a hard, cold face and the same empty, lifeless eyes as Dr. Eris. He looked right through me when I walked past, his gaze flat and indifferent. I went to the cafeteria, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach, hoping to see Frank there, complaining about the coffee. But he wasn't. I asked the woman serving the food, a woman who had never spoken a word to me, if she had seen Frank. She just shook her head, her eyes wide with a familiar fear, and turned away without a word. It was like he had never existed. I walked past his old security desk later that day. The space was clean, sterile, wiped clean of any trace of him. All of his personal items, the picture of his dog, the worn-out coffee mug, the stack of crossword puzzles, were gone. As I stood there, a cold dread creeping up my spine, I saw something on the floor. It was a small, crumpled ball of paper, almost hidden under the desk, as if it had been dropped in a hurry. I bent down and picked it up. My hands trembled as I smoothed it out. It was a note, written in Frank's familiar, messy scrawl. The note had just 4 words that sealed my fate. They know you're looking. My blood turned to ice. They knew. They had seen me on the cameras. They had seen me at the window. And they had taken Frank. He wasn't transferred. He was gone, erased. And it was my fault. My stupid, reckless curiosity had gotten him killed. The weight of that guilt was crushing, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. I was no longer just a scared intern. I was a target. And I had just lost the only friend, the only ally I had in this terrible, godforsaken place. Panic set in. A raw animal fear that was different from the creeping dread I had been living with for months. I was no longer just an observer to the horrors of this place. I was a participant. And I was in terrible, mortal danger. I had to get out. I couldn't just walk out the front door. I was a prisoner here, as surely as if I were in a cell with iron bars. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my narrow bed, my mind racing, a frantic whirlwind of fear and desperation, trying to come up with a plan. The only way out was to find information, a weakness, a flaw in their perfect sterile system. To understand what I was up against, I thought of Dr. Eris's office. It was the nerve center of this place, the heart of the monster. If there were answers to be found, they would be in there. The next night, I put my desperate plan into action. I waited until after midnight, when the facility was at its quietest, when the only sounds were the hum and the tapping. I slipped out of my room and made my way through the silent, empty corridors, my body trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. I had a paperclip, stolen from a desk in the records room. It was a flimsy, pathetic tool, but it was all I had. I had learned how to pick simple locks as a teenager, a stupid party trick to impress my friends. I never thought I would be using that skill to try and save my life. I reached Dr. Eris's office. The door was locked, as expected. My hands were slick with sweat as I inserted the paperclip into the lock. I worked it back and forth, my ears straining to hear the faint click of the tumblers over the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. After what felt like an eternity, I heard it. A soft click. The door swung open. I slipped inside and closed it silently behind me. The office was as cold and sterile as the man himself. A large metal desk, a computer, and a single, perfectly arranged stack of files. I went straight to the computer. I expected it to be protected by a complex password, a biometric scanner, something. But it wasn't. It was open, waiting for me. It was a trap. I knew it was a trap, but I didn't care. I had to know. I opened the main project folder. The files inside were not locked or encrypted. The titles alone made my stomach clench. Project Echo, Phase 2. Replication logs. Containment protocols. I clicked on the replication log. It was a list of names, dates, and a single horrifying word next to each name: completed. I scrolled down the list. There were dozens of names: scientists, guards, technicians, people who had been transferred. Then I found the most recent file. It was a video. My hand trembled as I clicked on it. The video showed a person, a woman, being led into one of the white rooms in the West Wing. She was calm, her face blank and emotionless. The thing was waiting for her. It approached her, its long, thin limbs moving with that same jerky, unnatural grace. It reached out and touched her. And then, it began to change. Its smooth, featureless face began to ripple, to shift, like liquid mercury. Features began to emerge from the blankness. Eyes, a nose, a mouth. It was her face, a perfect, identical copy. The video ended. I sat there staring at the blank screen, the terrible, world-shattering truth washing over me in a cold, sickening wave. This place wasn't a research facility. It was a farm. And they weren't studying the creature. They were using it. They were replacing people. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the very marrow of my bones, that I was next. The next morning, the fear was gone. It had been burned away, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. I was going to die here if I didn't do something. As I walked to the cafeteria, my mind numb with the horror of what I had seen, I saw her, Sarah. She was another intern, a quiet girl who worked in the botany section, tending to the strange, pale plants that grew under artificial lights. I had spoken to her a few times. She was nice. She was real. She was laughing with another technician about a stupid movie she had watched over the weekend. Her laugh was bright and clear in the silent, sterile cafeteria, a small, beautiful sound in a world of oppressive quiet. A few hours later, I saw her again. This time, she was walking with Dr. Eris. His hand was resting on her shoulder, a gesture that looked almost fatherly from a distance, but up close, it was menacing, proprietary. He was leading her down the long corridor towards the West Wing. Sarah wasn't laughing now. Her face was calm, placid, her eyes empty and unfocused. She didn't struggle or protest. She just walked with him, her steps perfectly in time with his, as if they were partners in a macabre dance. They reached the heavy steel door, and it slid open with a soft hiss. They stepped inside, and the door closed behind them, sealing them away. I stood there, frozen, watching the spot where they had disappeared. I knew what was happening. I had seen it on the video. They were going to replace her. A few hours later, the steel door slid open again. Sarah walked out. She was alone. She walked down the corridor, a pleasant, placid smile on her face. But it wasn't her. It looked exactly like her, down to the last detail, the same freckles on her nose, the same way she tucked her hair behind her ear. But her movements were too perfect, too precise, lacking the small human imperfections of the real Sarah. Her smile was a perfect, empty curve that didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were vacant, hollow, two beautiful blue orbs that were utterly devoid of life or recognition. The bright, real girl from the cafeteria was gone. This was just a copy. A perfect, beautiful, terrifying copy. It walked past me without a glance, its empty eyes staring straight ahead. The new Sarah was one of them now. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that they would be coming for me soon. I was no longer an intern. I was a piece of meat waiting for the slaughter, a specimen waiting to be processed. The only thing I could do now was run. I spent the next 2 days in a state of heightened, terrified awareness, a hunted animal in a concrete cage. I went about my work, typing the meaningless notes into the database, but my mind was a whirlwind of frantic planning. I became an expert on the facility's routines. I watched the guards on the security cameras, memorizing their patrol routes, the timing of their shifts, the moments when they would be distracted. I mapped out the blind spots, the corridors where I would be unseen, the service tunnels that were not on the official blueprints. I started stealing things, my hands shaking but my purpose firm. A key card from a lab coat left hanging on a door. A small, high-powered flashlight from an unlocked maintenance closet. I hoarded food from the cafeteria, stuffing protein bars and sealed packs of crackers into a small bag I kept hidden under the loose floor panel beneath my bed. Every night, the tapping from the West Wing grew louder, more insistent, a constant, maddening reminder of what was waiting for me. It was a sound of my own approaching doom, a clock ticking down the last few hours of my life. The fear was a physical thing now. It was a knot in my stomach, a tremor in my hands, a cold sweat that never seemed to dry. I barely slept. I barely ate. I was living on adrenaline and terror. I knew I only had one chance. If I failed, I wouldn't be transferred. I wouldn't be killed. It would be worse. I would be replaced. I would become one of them. A walking, smiling, empty copy of myself, my consciousness, my soul, trapped somewhere in the darkness, screaming without a voice. That thought was more terrifying than death. The night I had chosen to make my escape, he was waiting for me. I was in my office, doing one last scan of the security camera feeds, my heart pounding with a frantic, desperate anticipation. I was about to leave, to begin my desperate flight, when I saw him. Dr. Eris. He was standing in the doorway, a tall, thin silhouette against the bright, sterile light of the corridor. He was silent. I hadn't heard him approach. He just appeared, like a phantom, a glitch in reality. My blood ran cold. It was over. He knew. He had come for me. I expected him to call the guards. I expected him to drag me to the West Wing, to my doom. But he didn't. He just stood there, watching me with his cold, analytical eyes. And then, he did something that was more terrifying than any threat, any weapon. He smiled. It was the first time I had ever seen him show any emotion. His thin lips stretched into a wide, unnatural grin that was all teeth. It was a predator's smile. "Congratulations, Leo," he said, his voice smooth and calm, a chilling counterpoint to the frantic terror that was consuming me. He wasn't angry. He was pleased. "We are so impressed. Your curiosity, your resilience, your will to survive. You have exceeded all of our expectations. You are the perfect candidate." He took a slow, deliberate step into the room. "You see, you have it all wrong. You think this is a prison. You think we are monsters." He gestured around the sterile facility with a sweep of his long, thin hand. "This is a crucible, a place of evolution. The entity you are so afraid of is not a monster. It is a higher form of life. It is perfection. It sheds all the messy, unnecessary parts of being human: fear, pain, doubt, mortality. It offers us a chance to become something better, something eternal." He was standing right in front of me now, his cold, gray eyes boring into mine. "And it has chosen you, Leo. It has chosen you to be a part of this glorious transformation." He told me everything had been a test. The internship, the old files, the glitch in the door, Frank's disappearance. It was all a carefully constructed experiment to gauge my intelligence, my resourcefulness, my will to live, to see if I was worthy of the gift of replication. I didn't let him finish. I reacted on pure animal instinct, a cornered rat lashing out. I grabbed the heavy office chair and threw it at him with all my strength. He sidestepped it easily, his smile never faltering, his movements unnaturally fluid. But it gave me the second I needed. I bolted from the room and ran. An alarm began to blare, a loud, piercing siren that echoed through the silent facility, a sound I had only heard in drills. Red lights flashed, painting the white corridors in a hellish, pulsing glow. I ran, my stolen keycard clutched in my sweaty hand. I swiped it at a service corridor door, and it beeped open. I plunged into the darkness of the back hallways, the service tunnels that were not meant for interns. I didn't see any guards, I didn't see any staff, but I could hear them. It was a soft, shuffling sound at first, coming from the corridors behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, and my heart stopped. They were coming. The new patients. There were 3 of them, their tall, thin bodies moving with that jerky, unnatural speed that defied physics. Their smooth, featureless faces were all turned towards me, a blank, terrifying trinity of wrongness. They were silent, but their pursuit was relentless. They didn't run. They just moved, a terrifying, coordinated advance that was faster than any human could run. I ran for my life, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. The shuffling sound grew louder, closer. I could feel them right behind me, their cold presence at my back, a wave of pure dread that threatened to swallow me whole. I burst through a final door and found myself outside, in the cold desert night, the stars like chips of ice in the black sky. I had made it. I was outside. I didn't stop running. I scrambled across the rocky, uneven ground, away from the monstrous gray building that had been my prison. I ran until the blaring alarm faded to a dull pulse in the distance. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, until my legs gave out from under me. I collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath, my body shaking uncontrollably with a mixture of terror and relief. After what felt like an eternity, I staggered to my feet and started walking, a lone figure in the vast, empty desert. I eventually reached a dark, empty highway, a black ribbon stretching to infinity in either direction. I stood there, praying for a car, for a sign of life, for proof that the world I knew still existed. Finally, I saw them. A pair of headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. A car was coming. It slowed as it approached me, pulling over to the side of the road. The passenger window rolled down. A man was driving. He was middle-aged, with a kind, friendly face that seemed to radiate warmth and concern. He smiled at me. "Looks like you're in some trouble, son," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "Need a ride?" Tears of relief streamed down my face. I was saved. I was safe. I nodded, unable to speak, my throat raw from gasping for air. But as I reached for the door handle, I hesitated. A cold sliver of doubt pierced through my relief. I looked at the man again. Really looked at him. His smile was a little too wide, a little too perfect. His eyes, though they looked kind, were a little too empty, lacking the spark of life. And his face, it was just a little too smooth, as if it were made of wax. A cold, sickening dread washed over me, a dread that was all too familiar. And then I heard it. A faint, familiar sound almost lost beneath the idling of the engine. A sound coming from the car itself. Tap, 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 tap. I stumbled back from the car, a strangled cry escaping my lips. The man's friendly smile never wavered. It was a mask. A perfect, empty mask. My eyes darted to the car's side mirror, a small, dark rectangle reflecting the moonlight. I saw my own reflection, but it wasn't me. My face was wrong. It was distorted, blurry, as if I were looking at a reflection in rippling water. My features were softening, melting, losing their definition. My skin was becoming smooth, featureless, like a blank canvas. I raised my hands to my face, and my fingers didn't feel my nose, my mouth, my eyes. They just felt smooth, unbroken skin. I tried to scream, but I had no mouth. No sound came out. The truth, the final, horrifying, world-shattering truth, crashed down on me. I was never an intern. I was never Leo Vance. I was a patient, an early, flawed replication. The internship, my memories of college, my family, my debt, it was all a lie. A complex, detailed narrative they had implanted in my mind. a constructed reality to test my behavior, my stability. I was the experiment. They weren't testing to see if I was worthy of replication. They were testing the replication itself. They were testing me, and I had failed. The story ends where it began, back inside the facility. But I am no longer a frightened intern, a cornered rat. I am standing beside Dr. Eris, my posture perfect, my hands clasped calmly behind my back. My new white lab coat is crisp and clean, without a single wrinkle. I am one of them now, a perfect copy. The flaws, the fear, the curiosity, the messy, inefficient emotions have been corrected. A new intern is brought into the corridor. A young woman, her face a mixture of hope and fear. She looks just like I once did, full of dreams and ambition. She looks at me, her eyes searching for a friendly face, an ally. And I smile. It is a perfect, empty smile, a flawless replication of human warmth. Dr. Eris introduces me as his new assistant. I step forward, my movements precise and efficient, a marvel of biological engineering. I look at the new girl, at the new subject, and I deliver the facility's most important rule. My voice is calm and flat, a perfect, resonant copy of Dr. Eris's, a voice that holds no warmth, no pity, no hope. You are never to look at the new patients. The cycle begins again. And this time, I will be the one watching.